Today, we're digging into a really provocative idea that the AI helping us think might actually be costing us the ability to do so. Let's talk about the cognitive cost of AI. Look, AI writing assistants are incredible. They help millions of us get things done so much faster. But it's making researchers ask a pretty crucial question. When we hand over our writing to an AI, what exactly is happening to our ability to think for ourselves? And that really brings us to our new favorite coworker, right? The large language model, or LLM. I mean, tools like ChatGPT are practically part of the furniture now for millions of us. The convenience is just off the charts. But a recent MIT study decided to poke around and look for the hidden cost. They set up an experiment in an educational setting to ask one simple question: what is the cognitive price we pay for all this convenience? So, to find out, they designed this really clever experiment. Basically, a three-way showdown between the human brain and our two most common digital helpers: search engines and LLMs. So here's the setup. They got 54 people and divided them into three groups. The first group, they got to use a top-of-the-line LLM, GPT-4o, to help them write an essay. The second group could only use a search engine. And the third group, well, they were on their own, just their brains. And the really cool part is that the whole time, they were all wearing EEG headsets, monitoring their brain activity. The first thing they looked at were the essays themselves. And what they found was, well, it was pretty revealing. They had actual English teachers grade these essays, and the feedback was powerful. They said that the AI-assisted essays were often technically perfect, great grammar, solid structure, but they felt, and this is their word, soulless. They said they just lacked any real personal insight or creativity. And you can literally see what the teachers were feeling right here. On the left, that's a conceptual map of an LLM-assisted essay. See how it's this really complex, dense, tangled web? Now compare that to the brain-only essay on the right. The structure is simpler, much more direct. It's like you're looking at two fundamentally different ways of thinking.
The linguistic analysis found another huge difference. The LLM essays were just packed with something called named entities. Names, dates, places, specific facts. As you can see, the LLM group used way more of them than the search engine group, and a ton more than the brain-only group, whose writing was much more personal and reflective.
And this is where it gets really wild. They also had an AI judge score the essays, and its opinions constantly clashed with the human teachers. These heat maps show that disagreement perfectly. The AI judge would often give an essay a high score for technical quality, while the human teachers gave that exact same essay low scores for content and uniqueness. They were valuing completely different things. So, okay, the essays were different. But what about the writers? This brings us to what I think is the most dramatic finding of the entire study: what people actually remembered after the fact. I mean, it's such a simple question, but it's profound. After you've written something with AI, how much of it is actually in your own head? The results here are just staggering. In a follow-up session, they asked participants to, quote, just one sentence from the essay they had just written. Look at this. Nearly 80% of the LLM users couldn't remember a single sentence, not one. But for the brain-only group, it was the complete opposite. Nearly 80% could quote a sentence. It was as if relying on the AI prevented the information from ever getting into their memory in the first place. So we have soulless essays, and we have forgotten content. The final piece of the puzzle came from that EEG data, a literal look inside the minds of the participants as they were working. These brain connectivity maps show a clear neurological split. The brain-only group showed activity that's linked to deep internal thinking and synthesizing ideas. The LLM group's brain patterns, though, were consistent with something called cognitive offloading. It's basically a fancy way of saying their brains were outsourcing the hard work of thinking to the machine. This led the researchers to identify two really distinct modes of thinking. On the one hand, you have cognitive offloading, which they saw in the LLM users. You rely on an external tool, and it reduces that deep mental processing. On the other hand, you have deep cognitive integration, what the brain-only group was doing. That involves making the connections internally, which is the very process that strengthens memory and understanding. So let's bring all these clues together. What is the ultimate cost of all this amazing convenience that AI gives us?
We've seen this really clear pattern emerge. Using an LLM was connected to writing that was polished but felt hollow, a frankly shocking inability to remember the content,
and brain activity that showed the mind was basically letting the tool do all of the work. And all this leads to the study's central concept. The researchers coined a term for it: cognitive debt. You should think of it just like financial debt, but for your brain. By repeatedly putting off the mental effort and handing it to a tool, you risk a serious long-term cost, a decline in your own critical thinking, creativity, and independent thought. Now, the study isn't saying AI is bad. It's saying that convenience has a cost. And it leaves all of us with a really vital question to think about in our own lives. As our tools get exponentially smarter, what conscious choices do we have to make to ensure that we do too?